to begin. Good morning, everyone. Tom Venditti here. I want to welcome everyone to another WEDnet Workshop Wednesday. In today's workshop, we'll be taking a close look at the invoicing process, walking through all of the things you need to think about and the things you need to do in order to process invoices. It looks like right now everyone's video is off. That's good. Everyone is on mute. That's good as well. As always, if you have questions as we go, feel free to unmute and ask your questions, or you can send them to Christine using chat. As you're aware, this workshop is being recorded. Links to the recording will be available on Isaac File Share soon after the workshop. And we will also post a version of the PowerPoint on File Share. And finally, as a reminder, DCED will provide a general department and program funding update at our next workshop scheduled for July 15th. And then we will put out a schedule for future workshops beyond that sometime in the next few weeks. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Angie, and here we go.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tom. Let's begin on Isaac. Okay, now before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know that there is a lot of information here that we're going to be going over today, and a lot of tips for the partners as well as for your companies. To begin with partner review invoices, as with anything with Isaac, there is multiple places that you can receive this information on your dashboard. You can look at the invoice status pie chart. You can look at under reports for invoice status or your memos. The ideal and optimum place to review the information in one location for multiple companies and multiple contracts is to go to your tools menu, click on the drop-down arrow, and go to approve invoicing. Once your report comes up, you'll see the multiple companies listed. Remember, for any type of invoice, whether it's in-house, third party, or partner, if you have reviewed the events on the training plan during the application process, the invoicing process can be a little easier to review. And you will be reviewing the same training plan fields that you would normally review during the application process. I often recommend to partners, one of the first things you can look at is your notes icon. Review any notes that have been added. If the invoice is a resubmission to the partner review due to a previous sendback issue, see if all the issues are resolved, okay? If not, then you might need to send it back to the company with detailed instructions of what still needs to be taken care of. So I ask the partners, one of the first things you do is look at your notes, because you may have added a note of something that you wanted to look at when the company finally submitted. Also, I asked partners to look at the attachment icon. This icon contains any documentation that is uploaded from a company or additions from the partner. Example, if you ask the statewide director for an exemption for this class, the email approval must be attached and labeled correctly, and you need to review each of the attachments. One tip, if any attachments contain visible Social Security numbers, it will need to be removed and deleted. When you're looking at the attachments, remember for third-party invoices, you should ask yourself, is this actually a third-party provided training, or is it in-house or partner? You also want to look at the attachment types. Okay, review all the attachments to verify that the type of attachment is accurate by clicking on the drop-down arrow and the selections. Many times the company will mark an actual invoice from the trainer as proof of payment. Speaking of proof of payment, if a vendor's invoice attachment is an unpaid registration confirmation, proof of payment is required. If the training dates listed on the invoice are outside the current fiscal year, additional vendor documentation confirming the training dates within the fiscal year is required. If the employee has paid for the training, okay, then we need proof of reimbursement from the company to the employee. Or if the address listed on the invoice are inaccurate, we need an explanation. Additional documentation can also be for college level courses. Grades are required for college level courses because failed courses are not reimbursed. One other note on proof of payment.
If there's any way.
I'm sorry? Okay. For proof of payment, if a company reimburses the employee, but they have internal tuition reimbursement caps. Remember, if the cost of the course is $1,200, but the company's cap is $1,000, the company can only receive the $1,000 in reimbursement, not the $1,200. Additionally, self-study courses require certificates of completion to be attached for each employee listed on the roster. Then we're getting into library vendor documentation. As we all know, this requires a lot more information. When they upload the vendor invoice, remember it needs to be attached to each of the reimbursement invoices added to the training event. When we discussed applications, we briefly touched on the fact that on the training plan, you can have one training event, but then when you click on the $sign, you may have multiple reimbursement invoices. If this is library training, the vendor invoice needs to be attached to each one. The vendor invoice also needs to indicate the start of the access, duration of the library access, such as monthly, quarterly, or annually, or the number of licenses employees to be trained. If not, you may need additional documentation, such as the agreement, the contract, a quote, or a proposal. In order for library training to be submitted for an employee, that employee must complete 3 courses of at least 30 minutes long, and documentation with the attachment type of library vendor documentation must be added. On this documentation, it needs to include the start and end dates of each of the 3 courses, the length of the course, because we have to be able to verify over 30 minutes, the employee name, the course title, and what we call status, because remember, failed courses will not be reimbursed. So, okay, hold on a second. Someone is in Isaac, please log off. Okay, well, I'm just going to continue a little further until this populates. When you start to compare the vendor invoice to the invoice details screen, I usually have 2 screens open so that I can look at each of them. Sorry, I'm just going to go in through this. Okay, and what I am comparing is the course title of the class. Does it match the third-party invoice? Course description. Okay, I'm looking at the course description to see if it's 2 complete sentences with the topics covered and learned. The training provider type. Okay, is it actually a third-party class? Sometimes companies will list their current partner as a third party instead of the partner, or they'll list another partner as theirs. That's what you need to verify. Training vendor name. Does it match the third-party invoice? The location of the training is where was the training actually held? When we're looking at training vendor location, you have 3 choices: in PA, in USA, or outside USA. What we're looking for training vendor location is where is the training vendor located? Okay, location of actual training. Was it on site at the company, vendor location, or other offsite? Then we're looking at how is the training conducted under training method. Once you have that information compared, then you want to look at the training start and end dates. Now, these dates are not required to be listed on the third-party invoice, but they might be, and if they do, they need to match. So the start date of the training is the first date of the training, and the end date is the very last date of the training. Okay, remember, it's not required to be listed, but if it is, it needs to match. If it does not match, we need a note or documentation as to why it's not matching from either the company or the trainer. The total class hours, it's not required to be on the vendor invoice, but if it is listed, you need to make sure that it is matching on the reimbursement invoice. Also, remember, we had noted in the past that 12 hours of training usually is not common for 1 day of training. So you need to make sure that it doesn't say 25 hours of training for 1 day of the start and end dates. Also, you need to look at the multiple groups. Remember, we stated earlier that groups are determined by the same material taught to different employees for the same amount of time over the course of hours, days, or weeks. Different material taught to the same employees is one group. Same material taught to different employees is multiple groups. Partners can change any information on the invoice details screen that is available when you click the invoice details icon. As you can see from this screen, the training event name cannot be changed. That's not a field that's available to be changed. There's no description here, and there's no training provider listed. So if any of these items need to be changed, it needs to be sent back to the company with a detailed description, because they will receive an email stating why it was sent back. Okay. We also want to look at the cost per employee. The cost per employee is best seen when you open up this screen. It is highly recommended that you verify that the total cost matches the vendor invoice amount. Due to rounding, sometimes the costs can be off by a few cents. Sometimes I recommend to partners to re-enter the total cost of training to see if it comes up appropriately. Once you have compared this information, then I ask that you close these windows and go back to the reimbursement invoice. The next thing you want to look at is the roster. If the employees' names are listed on the third-party invoice, do they match the class roster? Do they match any certificates of completion or sign-in sheets that may have been added? Are the job titles actual job titles or departments? I often recommend to partners and to companies to answer the question, I am a, okay, with this information here, I am a janitor. if it says warehouse or production, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense and can tell you that it's automatically a department. You will not be able to change this information, so you will have to send it back to the company. Other things that you may want to look at on the roster is, are these actual job titles? Are these actual names? Or did they type in the Social Security number in place of the job title? Are the names entered correctly with the last name as the actual last name and the first name is actual the first name? I have seen them where they have been switched. Another thing I looked at is the estimate reimbursement amount. I will oftentimes click on the amount where another screen will populate and show me all the classes that that particular employee is listed under, so that I can verify their reimbursement amount. Okay, any changes to the class roster need to be sent back to the company input status. For partner training, remember the WEDnetPA partner is the partner providing training from the same partner that handles the company's current WEDNET grant. Other WEDnetPA partners are anyone that's conducting the training but doesn't handle the grant. We had used an example last time of the North Anthem Community College doing training for a company, and L-Tri-C is the actual WEDNET partner. So you need to verify that that information is accurate. For in-house trainers, remember it's a company employee for the in-house training and must be a current employee of the company, and additional invoice documentation may or may not be attached. Okay, remember in-house training is selected on the training plan, and you will notice that maybe they selected the wrong entry if the hourly rate is $500 or more. They may have additional documentation for books or supplies. Remember, these costs must be consumed during training, and it would be minus the shipping and handling and the tax. Okay, remember, if CDs, DVDs, video purchases over $300 for fiscal year 1920 or $500 for fiscal year 2021, an email needs to be sent to the statewide director for review and possible approval. If you get that approval, you need to attach it to the invoice documents. Right here is an example of the partner and in-house training. If you notice, when the company completes the information, it is two different types of screens. Okay, for partner training, you will notice that the training vendor name and training vendor location are not listed. So that's going to be your key point in looking at invoice details. Again, remember, in-house training is not eligible for extra large companies with over 500 employees. When you're looking at the in-house spreadsheet, the instructor's salary is based on their hourly salary. They don't include incentives, bonuses, or benefits. And if there are multiple instructors, they should be listed in this field for add instructor's name and job title. Multiple instructors, we also want the hourly wage. To determine the instructor's rate per hour, you would add and then average all of the instructor's salary to come up with the amount. The total hours are the total number of hours of all the groups. Remember, 8 hours for a single employee, 40 hours for a group of multiple employees. I have seen several people type in benefits and other companies not, but when the benefits are listed, it's the cost of benefits not including the base hourly rate. When we look further down for the multiple groups, remember, it's the definitions I gave earlier. How many times was the same information taught to different employees? Okay.
Angie,
Yes.
what is the minimum information required on a training invoice?
For which type of training? For a third-party training? The minimum amount is the name of the training provider, preferably the address and information, the name of the company, address and information, the name of the course, and the costing. Dates are not required, but if they are, they must match all of your other documentation uploaded and the reimbursement invoice start and end dates. The names of the employees are not required. But if they are listed, they need to match all other documentation, such as sign-in sheets and certificates of completion. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Hey,
Now,
Angie,
just-
it's Tom Venditti. I'm just going to interrupt you here for a moment. Whatever was happening on the server that was creating the load issue appears to now be back to normal. So it's your
Okay,
call, but if you
great.
wanted to go back to the live Isaac site, you can.
I would love to. Okay. Because what I want to show everyone, particularly with the in-house, if you notice, we have a little icon here for the in-house training for it's a spreadsheet where you have invoice details for third-party training. So when I click on the invoice details, you can now see the screen that comes up. You can also see that we cannot change the name. There's no course description and there's no training provider to choose. So these will be needed to be sent back. When you look at, here we go again. When you look at the in-house spreadsheet, it lists all of the information. I'm going to go back to that. Okay, because the final point that I wanted to say about the in-house spreadsheet is remember that the number of employees receiving the training is regardless of eligibility status, but the number of WEDnet eligible employees is based on the eligibility requirements for each invoice. Now, for the additional considerations about the contracts and invoices, I'm going to turn my screen over to Carol so she can mention some information. Carol, are you?
Yay!
You worked? Okay.
All right, so with just a little over 5 weeks left in FY 1920, I wanted to remind partners what they need to do to close out the current fiscal year, since we have quite a few new partners this year that have not gone through the year-end process.
Carol, can you share your screen?
I didn't share it? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. All contracts must be in final status by 7/31. Final status means either finalized or voided. I'm going to use FM Brown's dashboard as an example of the two types of contracts that need to be finalized. Contracts with invoices paid, such as their TS contract, must be put into final status by pressing the finalize button. You will notice that there is not a void button on any contract that has invoices that are paid. If you look at their ES contract, you notice that there are no invoices and there is no finalize button. You will have a void button instead. So all contracts must be in final status by 7/31. I highly suggest that you do not do any of this until 7/31 because finalizing any contract is a final action and cannot be undone. So if you finalize a contract today, and the company comes back to you tomorrow and says, I found an invoice that I would like to submit for reimbursement, unfortunately, we have no way of reopening a contract.
Carol,
Yes?
for the finalizing a contract, do you need to make a note before hitting finalize? And at the same token, for voiding a contract, do you need to enter a note?
Yes, Isaac does require you to enter a note for voiding and finalizing any contract.
What details should the partners include in those notes?
That is up to you, but whatever you type in your note will be in your email that is sent to the company. So if you want to just copy and paste, like you're doing all your contracts at the same time, you could put a generic note that says finalized contract due to fiscal year end. Voided contract due to fiscal year end. That's all you need to put. Because you're not asking the company to do anything. You're just telling them the contract's been finalized, we're done. If you want to elaborate, you're more than welcome to expand on your send back note to say, hey, if you're interested in FY 2021, give me a call and we'll talk. But that's up to you. How much you put in, how little you put in, that's totally up to you. I wanted to show you an example of 2 contracts that have already been finalized so you can see what they look like. Seakeeper has been finalized, and in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that it is in completed contract status. The finalize button is missing, the void button is missing, nothing more can be done to this contract. An example of a voided contract is this Rodan. It says voided contract, and as you can see, there is no void button or reallocate button or a finalize button. So those are examples of how contracts will look once you finalize them. Now, the only thing that you need to keep in mind is that you cannot finalize a contract on 7/31 that has invoices that are going to be paid on the August 5th check cycle. Those you will not be able to do, and you just leave them until the check cycle has run, and then I will finalize them myself because I can't run year-end figures until all contracts are in final status. There's nothing that you need to do with any pending applications that are in steps 1 through 3 or partner review. You can leave those as is. You do not need to go and void them. Just leave them as is. And nothing's required for those. Does anybody have any questions regarding closing out the fiscal year? All right. I'm going to move on to a couple other topics that Angie may have touched on in her presentation, but I wanted to clarify. And it's regarding parent and child invoices. I'm going to use this example here. This is Wolfgang, and they currently have a parent invoice at partner review and a child invoice for $6.64. What I highly suggest you to do is when invoices are at partner review and you see that they have a child invoice, to add the additional funds to the contract at this step before you submit it to statewide office review. Because if you submit it to statewide office review and I see that there is a child invoice, I'm going to send it back to you asking you to put additional funds on the contract. The only time you would not add additional funds to the contract would be 1, you don't have any uncommitted funds, or 2, the company has maxed out their grant with the company cap and it cannot be increased any higher. Any questions about parent or child invoices? One thing that Angie touched on were vendor invoices. This is an example of the vendor invoice with 3 different training events. These need to be entered as 3 separate training events. They cannot be combined into 1 training event for the total cost of the vendor invoice. So I just wanted to show you that as an example. I also wanted to show you an example of identical training that was done multiple times, but they entered it as 1 invoice to save the company time and effort. This is leadership development. It was offered twice for a total of 42 employees for $28,998. There were 2 vendor invoices provided, which is leadership in the afternoon, and a leadership in the morning. Even though the vendor provided 2 separate invoices, this is identical training, so you can enter it as one training event by combining the total hours, the training dates, the employees, and the total cost. Does anyone have any questions regarding that? And the last thing I wanted to touch base on is regarding invoice sendbacks. I highly suggest that you look at everything, all attachments, all screens, all notes before sending an invoice back to company or back to partner review. Or I'm sorry, company review. The reason being is if an invoice has multiple issues, you can send it back in one email itemizing what it is that they need to fix before it's submitted back to partner review. An example is this contract 296439, invoice 124088. It had 4 different issues that I itemized for the partner and then sent it back to partner review. The partner then copied and pasted my send back note as her send back to the company, instructing what the company needed to do to fix this. And so that way, when it comes back into partner's review, the partner can double check to see if the company has addressed all 4 issues before sending it to the statewide office. One thing that the newer partners may or may not know is that the notes icon is not visible to companies. It is only visible at the partner level and higher. So if your send back note says, see notes icon, companies do not have that ability and will not know what you mean. So you physically have to type your send back issues in the send back email. Otherwise, the company will not know what to do and will contact you. I don't think I have anything else to cover, Angie. Do you want? I'm going to turn it back over to Angie.
Okay. Okay. We want to touch base a little bit on some best practices and some tips for the partners. Okay. After you review all the training information, you can add notes to the notes field, which is what Carol just touched on. And remember, a note is not required for approving an invoice to the statewide office level, but it is required when you're sending the invoice back to the company. Another point that I recommend is about company input invoices. I often suggest to partners, particularly around the reallocation time and at the end of the fiscal year, to review your company input invoices. By reviewing these invoices prior to the company submitting for partner review, a partner can assist the company with any needed changes, advise on appropriate documentation, or even ask for exemptions from the statewide director. So you can get all of your preliminary work done ahead of time. You can also see how much funds they may need if the employees on the roster have reached their limits or not. I also advise my companies to enter the course information into Isaac as soon as they become aware of the class. It's what I call a future class. This information would include adding a training event if needed to the training plan. Okay, entering the class details under the $ icon, entering the roster, and uploading any third-party invoice. Remember,
Excuse me, Ann.
Yes?
Are you intending to be sharing your screen?
Yes, I thought I did. I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so going back to the company input invoices, like I said, I advise my companies to enter or completion. This information will give the partner the idea of the funds that are needed. Then I ask the company to review all of the details. I'm sorry, this is not working nicely. There we go. So once we know what the possible funds are needed, then I ask the company to review the details, change any information like the rosters or the dates, and then submit. Remember, some adjustments can be made by the partner. Again, I recommend if you do this, contact the company stating the changes you made, possibly sending back the invoice to company input level and ask them to review it and then resubmit if they agree with your changes, especially when you're dealing with course descriptions, because you may be trying to help them with the course, and that may not be the topics that were actually covered, or the costing, or the number of groups, or the dates. They may have alterations, so you need to look at that. Carol touched on some sendback issues, and as she stated, look at all the screens before sending the invoices back to the company so that all issues can be addressed in one sendback. It's recommended to itemize your issues. If you get a sendback from the state, I love Carol's tip. I say this all the time. Just copy and paste what Carol has put in the sendback from the statewide office to you. She always itemizes it, and it's always detailed on what information is needed. Just remember, the company will receive an email with this information. If you use a one-word sendback, it doesn't really tell them what's needed, like roster or documentation. They're going to be questioning you about it. Sometimes I even recommend calling the company if it's a lot of information that's being requested so that you can clarify what's needed. I'm sorry for the multiple screen issues, but I'm hoping that we were able to pass along some good information on how to review the invoices. Does anyone have any additional questions? Tom?
Christine, do you have anything else through chat?
No.
This is Heather. I
Okay.
have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you're looking, I'm having issues with determining whether a contract is over invoiced because the data given in Isaac doesn't seem to match. And I've reported this, and Carol and I have been talking about this. So I have a contract that my profile, my dashboard says that I have one invoice over invoice for $26. When I go to that invoice, that pie chart says I'm over invoiced by $26. But if I do the math from how much is remaining in the contract minus what's unsubmitted, it's over $300. And as a partner, that's confusing. I don't understand why that is.
Do they have multiple invoices under company input?
Yep. And they all have dollar figures attached to them, and they total something like $300 and some. And they haven't been, they're in company input status. But it's showing that I'm only over invoiced by 26, when really I'm over invoiced by like 300 and some.
Carol? Carol?
Yes.
Is this part of the child invoice issue that we are aware of and working on?
No, so what happens is if there's limited funds left on a contract, Isaac does not know which invoice at company input status is going to be submitted first. So what happens is there may be dollar amounts associated with all these invoices, And once an invoice is submitted from company input status to partner review, then you're going to see a mass calculation of all the remaining invoices at company input status, and the dollar amounts will be corrected.
But from a partner perspective, it's very confusing because we don't know that. And then I look on now I don't know, well, if this is the only one reporting as being over invoiced by 26 bucks, I don't know how many others are sitting out there that are really over invoiced, but they're not at that point. It's a confusing thing from my perspective.
Tom Anderson, would you have anything to add to the conversation?
I basically agree with what Carol said, in that you don't know which one is going to be submitted. So the thing is that you would limit the number of invoices that a company could enter if they were over invoiced after just creating the invoices. They have to submit the invoices before they actually count against them.
I still find it confusing. Just
And-
because the company doesn't know, they might generate it and see that they're over invoiced, so they don't submit it because in their mind they're thinking they don't have enough money. And I have no warning from a partner's perspective based on what's on my dashboard to even know that that exists, unless I happen to go into the contract and I see it.
If you go into your dashboard, you have a funds requested widget, which will give you that information as well.
I think, Heather, for the time being, we'll take your comments into consideration to see if there's any way that we can address your concerns. But I think for right now, there's probably no simple way to make it any clearer as to what the actual over invoiced amounts are because of exactly what Tom and Carol stated. So.
Tom,
I get that
everything
it's
under my
confusing.
funds requested says 0. 0 applications pending, 0 applications completed, 0 over invoice contracts, 0 invoices not submitted, total funds requested 0. This doesn't make any sense, none of it. Oh, I see, okay. Yeah, it all says 0. So that doesn't tell me anything either.
Yeah, that appears to be a new bug.
Do you want me to report it after this?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, Heather, we'll continue the conversation beyond this and see if there's anything more we can do. But in the interim, does anyone else have any other questions about the invoicing workshop today?
Tom, I have a couple over here.
Okay, go ahead.
Someone wants to review the changes partners can make to invoice input.
Okay, for the invoice input, and I just tried to go back to Isaac and it's still showing black for me, so please bear with me. For the invoice details, when you're under partner review invoices, okay, if you notice, you cannot make a change to the title, to the course description, to the type of training provider. The other fields which are active, you can make changes to. When you go into the roster, you cannot change any details of the roster without sending it back to the company.
I have one more.
Okay.
I believe, let me just add to that, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the partner policies and procedures, there's actually a section on what partners, which fields partners can and which fields they cannot change. So if you can refer to the partner policies and procedures, I think you'll get a much clearer definition of what you can and can't do. So
That is correct.
if there are still questions beyond that, then just email Carol directly, and she can help you with it.
It's page 22 of the partner guidelines.
Okay, is there a difference
Okay.
between a webinar and a self-study course? For example, if webinar is one session, does it still require a dated certificate to do all the self-study classes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is there a difference between a webinar and a self-study course? For example, if a webinar is one session, does it still require a dated certificate, as do all self-study courses, self-study classes?
No, webinars are not self-study usually.
Yeah, they are.
Well, a lot of vendor invoices I get are webinars and they have specific dates. So,
Yes, there's usually specific dates and specific times. Self-study courses usually shows a time frame
correct.
of when it can be completed. And a lot of this information can also be verified on the training provider's website. So if you have questions on whether something is a self-study course or a webinar or even just a regular third-party training course, whether it was one day, multiple days, if it was 10 hours in one day as opposed to 6 or 8, my recommendation is go to the training provider's website, look up the training course and the details to it to verify, is it a lengthy course held in one day? Is it multiple days? So you can actually, see, especially on public courses, it's a little different when the courses are customized to that particular company. And usually if a course is customized to that particular company, then the training provider has also given some kind of quote, email, or proposal detailing the customization. So there's always ways to look up whether or not it's a self-study, if it's a webinar, if it's one day, 2 days, couple of months.
So is there no certificate needed for a webinar then, is that correct?
Carol, do you require it at the statewide level? Because there are some webinars that provide a certificate and others that do not.
So if the vendor invoice has a date on it, then no, because it's for a specific date and time. If the webinar is part of a library purchase, such as prior unlimited or prior friend of a friend or whatever they call their library, and it's one of the 3 courses completed by the employee, then yes, a certificate of completion is going to be required because it's self-study.
Carol, I had a question from a partner in the past couple of days, and I wondered the statewide office response to this. They had a library course, and they had the documentation, the vendor documentation listing the name of the employee, the name of the courses, date of the course, and the duration, and that they passed it. But when the company went to enter the information on Isaac, they had only included 3 courses, 30 minutes each or more, and the hours that pertain just to those 3 courses. And the employee had taken 10 courses, passed them all, and instead of the total hours being 12 and a half for all 10, it would be 21 and a half. What information does the company and or partner need to see? Is it just for the 3 classes, or is it for all 10 for the hours and dates?
Based on what documentation you give to me. So if you give me the documentation for only 3 courses, then it's going to need to match the 3 courses. If you give me documentation for 12 courses, then it's going to need to match the documentation for 12 courses.
So they should include all dates and all hours for all 12 courses, regardless
Yeah.
of pass and fail?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make a difference whether they get reimbursed or not. But if the documentation says they took 12 hours of training, then the number of hours should reflect 12 hours.
Okay.
So it's 3.
All we really need is to make sure there's 3 over 30 minutes and 3 passed.
Correct.
Okay. Are there any other
Any other
questions?
questions? Christine, did you cover everything?
I did.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this one up, and I appreciate it. Looks like we had a good turnout. At one point, I saw 35 people on the workshop, so I think that was, again, a great turnout. And I finally just want to remind everybody again that on July 15th, Gwen Ross with DCED is going to be our guest speaker for the workshop, and assuming that there's nothing unusual happening between now and then, she'll give us an update on what's going on within the department and various programs. And I think by then we're going to have a much better picture of where things stand from a funding perspective. In fact, to the extent that I can give you any information right now, I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we may know something more before the end of this week or sometime next week in terms of where we stand with WEDnet funding for next year. So as soon as that information is available, I will share it with everyone. But I would definitely suggest you plan to join us on July 15th to get more details on everything going on within DCED directly from Gwen Ross. So again, thanks everybody for attending the workshop today, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Take care.